Hello, internet friends. Man, what a day it's been. It has been a long day for me. I know this update's late, but we're going to go through it. I started my morning off in the gym and had a crazy work day. Had to go skate for a little bit to work on a competition program that I'm working on. And still do dinner and still make videos. What a day. Full of excitement. So, last time I mentioned some work that I'd already started. Well, there it is. Taking a look at it here. Man, that wiring. The wiring has been kind of crazy for a while. Hold on a second. Let me flip this camera view for you. So here we have a fuel filter. That's not what I'm looking for. Here we have the main harness that comes from behind the firewall to the motor. And as controversial as it may be, I decided I'm going to modify this harness. That is where we are. I'll explain how we got here in a moment, but let's take a look at what we have done here. So here are all the firewall components in their original form. We haven't touched those guys. Don't really intend on it. Then we have this part that actually covers most of the engine components and comes down to this multi-pin connector here and here. And we'll talk about those in a second. Basically what I've done here is I've adapted some Ford multi-pin connections that they use in their own engine bay. And they're not perfect. This one's missing a little plastic piece. It's not perfect, but I said, you know, finding pins for these are going to be much easier than trying to find something kind of obscure. And the mil spec connectors, they're awesome, but I mean, I have bills to pay too and kids to feed, so those aren't really an option for me. Which leaves me with junkyard finds, which is exactly what this is. And honestly, it's working out. These are positive style connectors. They have options for our smaller wires. I could use larger gauge wires with the weather seals if I wanted to. I may do that in the future, but I didn't do it this time. The way this works is pretty simple. You take it, you plug in the other side, and then you latch the other side. Kind of hard to do with one hand. You'll have to take my word for it. Maybe I can show you in a later video. But it's nothing super fancy. It's just it locks and then you pull down a lock over it just to kind of secure it, which is great. Now there are more wires in this engine bay than there are pins in one connector. And thinking about it, I broke it down into basically 3 branches. You see the 2 big ones here. One of these, the red branch, covers a pretty significant part of the motor. This other one will service the other kind of side of it. So looking here, we have, I know these 3 wires right here are for the manifold differential pressure sensor. I won't be using that in this setup. It is a true 1G 6-bolt build in a 2G. There's nowhere to put the MDP, and I'm using an AEM 3.5 bar sensor back there anyways, so it'll need its own terminal, own connector for it, which we have right here. So coming back to this guy, we have the ignition transistor or PTU. There's a couple different names for it. We have the coil packs. We have cam angle sensor. the crank angle sensor. It's a bit of a mouthful for me. And a couple of other things. Those are things that may change depending on what kind of build I do. If I decide to drop in the coolant housing sensors are also in this block. So if I were to do a 6-bolt bottom end and a 7-bolt top end, all of that would change. I would change it on the other side of this connector and carry on. I can kind of think about doing that before I even drop the engine in and having that kind of set up and ready to go, plug and play. The other connector has the other items. I think the NOx sensor is actually in this one as well. There's a lot of stuff on this one. I'm not going to go through every one of these. This is really my lifesaver. This is going to keep me from having to do an intermediate harness for MDP to some AEM 3-bar or GM 3-bar, whatever. I'll also be doing my 1G cast and a 2G right here at this other side. So I'll have to worry about that intermediate harness. And speaking of the MDP, since I'm going speed density, well, where's my IAT? That brings us down to this other branch down here. This is a much smaller one. This is actually the factory wiring for our 2G MAF and the turbo wastegate purge solenoid thing. I apologize, I can't recall the words for it. But basically, the only thing I need out of this whole bundle of wires are 4 of them. I need the last 2. Let's see. I need the red and the red yellow. That's going to be for my boost controller, the Ingersoll Rand boost controller. And then that black wire and that little red wire will be my the red wire with the white stripe and the small red wire next to it will actually be my IAT pigtail, and the same kind of rules apply. So I'll take the other side of this harness, I will pin it directly at the terminal, snap it in, and things just fit. No intermediate harness, no crazy stuff, no weird business. Over here on the windshield, I have started on my engine harness. This is to replace what was originally there. This is all parts from Sheridan and the GXL wiring that is, kind of for automotive use. Nice braided loom, heat shrink, all the good stuff. Spent a lot of time on that. So that covers where we are. The question is, how did we get here? And that is a really depressing conversation. That nice Sheridan work right there. So, looking at my workbench here, you see a lot of stuff. You can see where I have been keeping up with the pinouts for several different branches and pigtails and tools everywhere. But what's really important about this is like this specific terminal here. Let's stretch this guy out. This is, you recognize that? Okay, this is the crank angle sensor. It's been spliced and heat shrink. And if we come down, it's been spliced again, and our connector has definitely seen better days. and then this wire kind of hangs out. This is that one from the cam angle that needs to be repurposed. You're not going to focus, are we? Okay. Nope, no focus. I could have just re-terminated this. I could have re-terminated this. It would have been okay. But I still have this kind of spaghetti nonsense going on. With this harness, the connector's just there. And the pinout is already done on the other side. So I don't have to worry about it. Other notable kind of situations looking through some of these. We had a lot of business like this. Just straight broken wire. This is one of the fuel injectors. We have line breaks all over the place in this vehicle. Let's see if I can pull this out without knocking over everything else. The wiring on this is just shot. It's broken, it's brittle, it's altered, and the easiest thing for me to do was actually just start over. Now, that is actually a demonstration of the good stuff that came out of the car. Looking at some of the bad stuff, around here somewhere, I have, yes, this guy. And that's what happens when you don't have a clean workspace. Alright, so we recognize this pigtail. 2-pin shielded cable. If you guessed the NOx sensor, you'd be correct. Now, this also falls in the same category as the other one for the cam. I could have, in theory, re-crimped this with a new terminal from Sheridan. But I've got 2 wire breaks. I've got this stuff falling apart, falling out. I've got this crazy ground situation for the shielding. I would have to basically start over from this point on. And I said, well, if I'm going to do that, I might as well do it here. And if we look very closely, it's extremely hard to see because of how tight I did it, and it's already taped up. This wire here is the signal side of the shielded wire from the connector right here. So I stripped it back, crimped it. I took the shielding braid and pushed it up with the ground and then crimped them together on the inside to keep it shielded, with the exception of that little bit right there. Now, on the actual sensor, there is a little bit of a break between the shielding and non-shielded part of the wiring. It is okay, but you need to minimize it as much as possible. We had so many sections of the harness that looked just like that. Missing pins, like our TPS over here is just missing the pin. Things legitimately just broken and not serviceable. Unfortunately, we have the same thing with the alternator as well. The alternator wiring is absolutely shot. This was what was left of it, and it was, well, it's a nightmare. We'll have to start over on that one as well, and that's okay. So that's how we got here. Anybody who's run these cars for a while probably know that your coolant temp sensor, they sell a dongle for. Mine was broken. The gauge thing was also broken. Going through here, I mean, it's problem after problem. This was how I purchased the car. That's going to have to get redone as well. So what I've managed to do with all of this is, with the exception of exactly one component, I've managed to keep the factory wiring up to this point and to this point down here. We don't need this guy anymore. He's trash. I could re-terminate all those wires and connect them in and have the same factory pin out as when I started, and that would be fine. The one exception for that one device is this guy right here. You can't see it very well. I did a pretty good job of making sure it was closed up. Red wire, yellow wire, and another shielded wire. This is the factory front O2 sensor. And since I'll be doing, or reinstalling rather, my LC2 Innovate wideband, no need for that stuff. So the only thing left for me to do to scratch this off my list is terminate the end of this guy and plug it in, and then plug in the devices. That's it. With where it is right now, the wiring's out of the way. I'm not worried about it. I may not connect the rest of the harness until much later, but this allows me to get my tuck and get some good solid connections that I won't have to worry about for a very, very long time. Now, while I'm speaking of wiring and my wideband, I did go ahead and start running. This is only kind of finger tight down there. I didn't want to put it in, you know, and torque it down yet. But I have the wideband connector and cable run, as well as my oil temperature and oil pressure. We're going to run them through this fender where there's already a loom. We're going to run them through a little access port. Oh, there we go. In there, and run them under the dash to our gauges. And I think that's going to take care of some problem wiring that we've had pretty much since I owned the car. Man, that was a lot of stuff. Oh, and one more thing. Thanks to the awesomeness of my buddy Josh, I got my screw back for the input to the fuse panel. So, also something to scratch off. So this is great. This is this week's update. It has been a long time in the making because of the amount of work to get these terminated correctly and the wires on the other side sequenced kind of perfectly. I like wiring, but when you mess up one of these and it's got the same color, it is a nightmare to have to try to unass. And I don't wish that upon anybody. So with that, that's all we got for this week. Check in Wednesday. Subscribe if you haven't, so you get that notification and I don't have to badger you about it privately. And until then, keep doing what you do.